The morning sun painted the Arizona desert in shades of gold and crimson when Joseph Crow Feather noticed the storm clouds gathering on the distant horizon. The 28-year-old Apache warrior had been tracking deer for 3 days, following ancient hunting paths that his grandfather had shown him as a boy. His weathered hands gripped his rifle as he watched the dark mass of clouds rolling across the sky like angry spirits. Joseph lived alone in a small cabin near the edge of the reservation, choosing solitude over the crowded village life that most of his people preferred. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine, and when he returned home, the noise and chaos of modern life felt overwhelming. The desert provided the peace his troubled mind needed, and the old ways of his ancestors gave him purpose. As the wind began to pick up, carrying the scent of rain and electricity, Joseph decided to head back toward his truck. The storm looked fierce, and he knew better than to be caught in the open when the desert unleashed its fury. Lightning could strike without warning, and flash floods could turn dry creek beds into raging torrents in minutes. He was making his way down a rocky slope when he heard it. A faint cry carried on the wind. Joseph stopped and listened, his trained ears picking up sounds that most people would miss. There it was again, definitely human, coming from the direction of Serpent's Canyon, a deep ravine that cut through the landscape like a wound. Against his better judgment, Joseph changed course and headed toward the sound. The wind was growing stronger now, whipping sand and debris through the air. The first fat raindrops began to fall as he reached the edge of the canyon and peered down into its depths. What he saw made his blood run cold. About 50 feet down the rocky wall, clinging to a narrow ledge, was a young woman. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair whipping around her face. Her clothes were torn, and even from this distance, Joseph could see that she was injured. Blood stained her shirt, and her left arm hung at an odd angle. "Help me," she called out when she spotted him. "Please, I can't hold on much longer." Joseph quickly assessed the situation. The storm was moving in fast, and once the rain started in earnest, the rocks would become slippery and dangerous. Lightning was already beginning to flash in the distance, and he could hear the rumble of thunder growing closer. He had rope in his truck, but it was a quarter-mile away. By the time he retrieved it and returned, the storm would be on them, and the woman might have fallen. Joseph made a decision that would change everything. "I'm coming down!" he shouted over the wind. "Try to stay calm!" Without waiting for her response, Joseph began his descent. He had climbed these canyons since childhood and knew every handhold and foothold. His fingers found familiar grooves in the rock, and his boots gripped the rough stone surfaces. The wind tried to push him against the wall, but he used his body weight to maintain control. As he climbed down, Joseph got a better look at the woman. She was definitely Apache, with the high cheekbones and dark eyes of his people. Her face was pale with pain and fear, but she was trying to stay strong. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her breathing was shallow. "What's your name?" Joseph called out as he made his way closer. "Sarah," she replied, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Sarah Whitehorse." The name hit Joseph like a physical blow. Whitehorse was a name he knew well. It belonged to Thomas Whitehorse, the war chief who had led the resistance against the cavalry in the 1880s. But more importantly, it was the family name of the woman Joseph had been planning to marry before he left for the military. Maria Whitehorse had been killed in a car accident while he was overseas, and he had never forgiven himself for not being there. "Are you related to Maria Whitehorse?" he asked as he reached the ledge where Sarah was trapped. Sarah's eyes widened with recognition and pain. "She was my sister," she whispered. "She used to talk about you all the time. Joseph Crow Feather, right? She said you were going to marry her." The words hit Joseph harder than any enemy bullet ever had. Here, clinging to a rock face in the middle of a desert storm, was the sister of the woman he had loved and lost. Fate, or perhaps the spirits of his ancestors had brought them together in this moment of crisis. "Hold on to me," Joseph said, pushing his emotions aside and focusing on the immediate danger. "We need to get out of here before the storm hits." Just as he spoke, the sky opened up. Rain began falling in heavy sheets, immediately making the rocks slippery and treacherous. Lightning flashed overhead, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Joseph wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist and began the difficult climb back up the canyon wall. Each step was a struggle against the wind and rain. Sarah tried to help, but her injured arm made it difficult. Several times they almost lost their grip as the wet rocks became increasingly dangerous. The lightning was getting closer now, striking the desert floor with brilliant flashes that lit up the landscape like day. Joseph knew they were running out of time. If lightning struck the canyon wall while they were climbing, they would both die. "I can't make it," Sarah gasped, her strength failing. "Leave me. Save yourself." "That's not happening," Joseph replied firmly. "Maria would never forgive me if I let anything happen to her sister." With a surge of determination, Joseph found reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. Step by step, handhold by handhold, he pulled them both up the rocky wall. The storm raged around them, but somehow they managed to stay ahead of the worst of it. When they finally reached the top of the canyon, both were exhausted and soaked to the bone. But they were alive. Joseph half-carried Sarah to his truck, which was parked behind a cluster of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind. As he started the engine and turned on the heater, Sarah looked at him with tears mixing with the rainwater on her face. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved my life." Joseph nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead to the implications of what had just happened. He had saved the sister of his lost love, but in doing so, he had also revealed himself to be the kind of man who would risk everything for family, even family that wasn't his own. As they drove through the storm toward the hospital, neither of them could have imagined that this single act of courage would soon draw the attention of warriors from across the Apache nation, or that Joseph's solitary life was about to change forever. 3 days after the storm, Joseph sat on his porch, watching the sunrise paint the desert in brilliant oranges and purples. Sarah was recovering well at the tribal hospital, her broken arm set in a cast and her other injuries healing. The doctors said she would make a full recovery, thanks to getting medical attention quickly. Joseph had visited her twice, bringing wildflowers he picked from the desert and books to help pass the time. During their conversations, he learned that Sarah was a teacher at the reservation school and had been hiking alone when she fell into the canyon. She had been trying to reach a sacred site where their grandmother used to take her and Maria to pray. What Joseph didn't know was that word of his heroic rescue was spreading like wildfire throughout the Apache community. Sarah had told her family about what happened, and they had shared the story with friends and relatives. Soon, people from other reservations were hearing about the Marine veteran who had risked his life to save a woman he barely knew. The story grew with each telling, as stories often do. Some said Joseph had climbed down the canyon wall with his bare hands while lightning struck all around him. Others claimed he had carried Sarah up the rocks with superhuman strength. What everyone agreed on was that he had shown the kind of courage and honor that their ancestors would have respected. On the morning of the 4th day, Joseph was startled from his coffee by the sound of engines approaching his cabin. He stepped outside to see a convoy of pickup trucks and motorcycles coming down the dirt road that led to his property. Dust clouds billowed behind the vehicles as they came to a stop in his yard. From the first truck stepped a man Joseph recognized immediately, Robert Standing Bear, the elected leader of the tribal council and one of the most respected elders in the community. Standing Bear was in his 70s, with silver hair braided down his back and wearing traditional Apache jewelry. Behind him came other tribal leaders, veterans from various wars, and young warriors who looked up to the older generation for guidance. "Joseph Crow Feather," Standing Bear said in a voice that carried the authority of decades of leadership. "We need to talk." Joseph nodded respectfully and gestured toward his porch. "Please, sit. I'll make coffee." As the men gathered on his porch and in his yard, Joseph busied himself with preparing coffee and trying to understand why so many important people had come to his remote cabin. Some of the faces he recognized from powwows and tribal gatherings, but others were strangers who must have traveled from far away. When everyone had been served, Standing Bear began to speak. "4 days ago, you saved the life of Sarah Whitehorse," he said. "This was not just any woman you saved. Sarah is the great-great-granddaughter of Chief Nietzsche, one of the last free Apache leaders. Her bloodline connects her to Geronimo himself through her mother's side." Joseph's eyes widened. He had known Sarah came from an important family, but he hadn't realized the full significance of her heritage. Standing Bear continued, "But that's not why we're here. We're here because of how you saved her. You didn't hesitate to risk your life for someone you barely knew. You showed the kind of courage that our people have always honored. You acted like a true Apache warrior." "I just did what anyone would do," Joseph replied humbly. "No," said another man, whom Joseph recognized as Marcus Running Wolf, a Vietnam veteran and respected warrior. "Most people would have gone for help. Most people would have played it safe. You chose to act even though it meant putting yourself in danger. That's the difference between a civilian and a warrior." Standing Bear nodded. "We've been talking to people who know you, Joseph. Your service record in the Marines is impressive. 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, recommendations from your commanding officers, but more importantly, people here remember you as a boy. They remember your grandfather, William Crow Feather, and the stories he told about the old days." Joseph felt a lump forming in his throat at the mention of his grandfather, who had died while Joseph was serving overseas. William Crow Feather had been a repository of traditional Apache knowledge and had spent years teaching Joseph about their history and culture. "Your grandfather saw something special in you," Standing Bear continued. "He used to say that you had the heart of a warrior, even as a child. He predicted that someday you would do something that would make the whole tribe proud." "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" Joseph asked, sensing that this conversation was leading somewhere significant. Standing Bear looked around at the other men, who all nodded their agreement. "We want to offer you something that hasn't been offered to anyone in more than 50 years. We want to induct you into the Warriors' Lodge." Joseph felt his heart skip a beat. The Warriors' Lodge was a traditional Apache institution that had been dormant for decades. It was made up of men who had proven themselves in battle and shown exceptional courage in defense of their people. The last formal induction had been after World War II, when returning veterans were honored for their service. "I don't understand," Joseph said. "I thought the Warriors' Lodge was just history now." "We've been talking about reviving it for years," explained Running Wolf. "Our young people need role models. They need to see what it means to live with honor and courage. Your actions 4 days ago reminded us that the warrior spirit is still alive in our people." Another man stepped forward. Joseph recognized him as David Geronimo, a direct descendant of the famous war leader and a decorated Army Ranger who had served in Iraq. "If you accept our offer, you won't just be joining a ceremonial organization. You'll be taking on real responsibilities. You'll help train our young men and women in traditional ways. You'll be a keeper of our warrior traditions." "And," Standing Bear added with a slight smile, "you'll find that being a member of the Warriors' Lodge brings certain obligations. When word gets out about your induction, warriors from other Apache bands will want to meet you. They'll want to test themselves against you, to learn from you, to share their own stories of courage." Joseph looked around at the assembled men, seeing respect and expectation in their eyes. These weren't just tribal politicians or community leaders. These were men who had faced combat, who had risked their lives for their country and their people. The fact that they considered him worthy of such honor was almost overwhelming. "I need time to think about this," Joseph said finally. "Take all the time you need," Standing Bear replied. "But know that this offer doesn't come lightly. We've discussed it at length, and we're all in agreement. You've shown that you embody the values we want to preserve and pass on to the next generation." As the men prepared to leave, Running Wolf approached Joseph privately. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. "Sarah Whitehorse has been asking about you. She wants to know if you're planning to visit her again." Joseph felt his face flush. "She's recovering well?" "She is. But I think she's more interested in the man who saved her than in her medical progress." Running Wolf smiled. "Your grandfather used to say that sometimes the spirits arrange things in ways we don't expect. Maybe saving Sarah was about more than just being in the right place at the right time." After the convoy of vehicles disappeared down the dirt road, Joseph sat on his porch in stunned silence. In the span of a few days, his quiet, solitary life had been turned upside down. He had saved a woman's life, discovered a connection to his past that he never knew existed, and been offered membership in a warrior society that most people thought was extinct. As he watched the desert landscape shimmer in the afternoon heat, Joseph found himself thinking about his grandfather's stories. William Crow Feather had often talked about how the spirits guided Apache warriors to their destinies, sometimes through events that seemed random, but were actually part of a larger plan. Maybe, Joseph thought, his grandfather had been right all along. Maybe everything that had happened, his military service, his return to the reservation, even his decision to live alone in the desert, had been preparing him for this moment. That evening, as stars began to appear in the clear desert sky, Joseph made his decision. He would accept the honor of joining the Warriors' Lodge, and he would visit Sarah again tomorrow. Whatever the spirits had planned for him, he was ready to face it with the courage his grandfather had taught him and the honor his people expected. The ceremony took place 3 weeks later, under a full moon, at a sacred site in the mountains that had been used by Apache warriors for generations. Joseph had spent those weeks preparing himself mentally and spiritually, fasting for 4 days and participating in sweat lodge ceremonies with the tribal elders. Sarah, who had been released from the hospital with her arm still in a cast, had insisted on attending despite her injuries. Word of Joseph's induction into the Warriors' Lodge had spread far beyond their reservation. Apache communities from across Arizona, New Mexico, and even as far away as Oklahoma had sent representatives to witness the ceremony. But it wasn't just Apaches who came. Navajo warriors, Hopi veterans, and members of other southwestern tribes arrived to show their respect. The number of people who showed up surprised everyone, including the tribal leaders who had organized the ceremony. What had been planned as a relatively small gathering of perhaps 50 people had grown into an assembly of more than 400 warriors, veterans, and tribal members from dozens of communities. Joseph stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, wearing traditional Apache warrior regalia that had been worn by his grandfather decades earlier. The buckskin shirt was decorated with intricate beadwork that told the story of his family's military service, and eagle feathers in his hair represented the courage he had shown in saving Sarah. Standing Bear began the ceremony by calling upon the spirits of Apache warriors who had gone before, including Geronimo, Cochise, and Naiche. The old man's voice carried across the desert as he spoke in Apache, his words translated by younger tribal members for those who didn't understand the traditional language. "We gather tonight to honor a warrior who has shown that the old ways are not dead," Standing Bear declared. "Joseph Crow Feather risked his life to save one of our daughters, asking for nothing in return. He acted with the courage of his ancestors and the honor of his people. One by one, warriors from different tribes stepped forward to share their own stories of courage and to pledge their support for the newly revived Warriors Lodge. A Navajo code talker from World War II spoke about the importance of preserving warrior traditions. A young Marine who had recently returned from overseas talked about how the ancient values had helped him survive combat. But the most powerful moment came when Thomas Whitehorse, Sarah's elderly uncle and a Vietnam veteran, approached Joseph with tears in his eyes. "You saved more than my niece's life," the old man said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our family's bloodline, our connection to the great chiefs of the past. For this, my family owes you a debt that can never be repaid." Thomas then did something that shocked everyone present. He removed his own warrior's necklace, a piece of traditional jewelry that had been in his family for generations, and placed it around Joseph's neck. "This belonged to my great-grandfather, Chief Nietzsche himself," Thomas announced. "It has been worn by warriors in my family for more than a century. Now it belongs to you, as a symbol of the bond between our families and your place among the greatest Apache warriors." The crowd erupted in traditional war cries and drumming as Joseph accepted the incredible honor. To receive such a gift was almost unheard of, especially from a family with such distinguished lineage. After the formal ceremony, as people gathered around fires to share food and stories, Joseph found himself surrounded by warriors who wanted to shake his hand and hear about his rescue of Sarah. But what surprised him most was the number of young people who approached him, teenagers and young adults, who wanted to know how they could follow in his footsteps. "I want to serve my country like you did," said a 16-year-old boy named Alex. "But I also want to stay connected to our traditions. How do you balance both?" Joseph thought carefully before answering. "The warrior spirit isn't about choosing between the old ways and the new ways," he said. "It's about taking the best of both and using them to serve your people. Whether you're fighting overseas or helping someone in your own community, the principles are the same: courage, honor, and putting others before yourself." As the night wore on, Joseph noticed that Sarah had been watching him from across the fire. When their eyes met, she smiled and walked over to where he was sitting. "How does it feel to be the most famous Apache warrior of the 21st century?" she asked, settling down beside him. Joseph laughed. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with all this attention. 3 weeks ago, I was just a guy living alone in the desert." "Maybe you were never meant to live alone," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe the spirits had other plans for you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the drums and singing that continued around them. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "I've been thinking about what happened in that canyon," she said. "About how you didn't hesitate to help me, even though you didn't know who I was. That kind of courage doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from who you are inside." Joseph turned to look at her, seeing something in her eyes that made his heart race. "Sarah, I know you love my sister," she interrupted gently, "and I'm not trying to replace her or compete with her memory. But I also know that Maria would want you to be happy. She would want you to have a family, to have someone who cares about you." Before Joseph could respond, they were interrupted by the approach of a group of warriors from different tribes. The men formed a circle around Joseph and Sarah, and Standing Bear stepped forward with a serious expression. "Joseph Crow Feather," the elder said formally. "The representatives of the warrior societies from 18 different tribes have asked me to make you an offer." Joseph stood up, sensing the importance of the moment. "What kind of offer?" "We want to establish a pan-tribal warriors lodge, with you as the founding leader," Standing Bear explained. "Your actions have reminded us all that the warrior spirit transcends tribal boundaries. We want to create an organization that brings together Native American veterans and warriors from all our peoples." Joseph felt the weight of the proposal settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just about his own tribe anymore. They were asking him to help unite warrior traditions from across Indian country. "This is a huge responsibility," Joseph said slowly. "I'm honored that you would consider me, but I'm not sure I'm ready for something this big." "None of us are ever ready for our true calling," said an elderly Cherokee veteran who had traveled from Oklahoma for the ceremony. "But the spirits don't wait for us to feel ready. They put opportunities in front of us and trust that we'll find the courage to meet them." Joseph looked around at the faces surrounding him. Men and women who had served their country, defended their communities, and preserved their traditions through decades of change and challenge. He saw hope in their eyes and a belief that he could help them accomplish something meaningful. "If I accept this responsibility," Joseph said finally, "I want to do it the right way. I want to honor the traditions of all our peoples while building something new that serves our communities today." The crowd erupted in celebration as Joseph formally accepted the leadership role, but as the cheering died down, he found himself looking at Sarah, who was smiling at him with pride and something deeper. "Looks like your quiet life in the desert is officially over," she said with a laugh. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Joseph replied, reaching for her uninjured hand. "Maybe it's time I stopped living in the past and started building a future." As the ceremony wound down and people began to head home, Joseph realized that everything had changed. He was no longer just a solitary veteran trying to find peace in the desert. He was now a leader, responsible for helping to preserve and protect the warrior traditions of his people for future generations. But more than that, he had found something he thought he had lost forever: the possibility of love, family, and belonging. As he walked Sarah to her family's truck, with the sacred necklace of Chief Nietzsche around his neck and the respect of 400 warriors behind him, Joseph knew that his grandfather had been right all along. Sometimes the spirits arrange things in ways we don't expect, bringing us exactly what we need when we're ready to receive it. His rescue of Sarah in that desert storm had been more than just a heroic act. It had been the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would honor both his past and his future.